By the way, Kevin, how many total books have you written?
10.
That's the same number as
And
I've read.
wow, look at this guy. Man, he's like, when I hang out with you, I do feel smarter because I'm like hanging out with a New York author, like just soulful, kind of like I just feel, Kevin comes to our events. I'm like, this is my guy, Kevin. Maybe it's like, it's the coolest thing. Matt's looking at me like I'm weird. Why is
No,
that?
because I feel dumber, right? Because like when I'm in the presence of like actual greatness, I'm like, oh God, I'm so
Oh God,
mediocre.
we're like over the top here already, you guys. So
From ABM to PLG, from medic to medpic, the world of business is constantly evolving. We'll cover the who, what, where, when, why, and most importantly, how you get the transaction. I'm Matt Amundson, and he's Craig Rosenberg. Let's get started.
I'm just going to start with this. Kevin is the author of Play Bigger, which is like one of the most iconic sort of go-to-market books written in B2B. Um, I can't say enough. Like, that it came out, I read it, then everyone read it, and you had to have read it, and it still has such legs. That's the thing that's so amazing, Kevin. It's like when I think about it, I can still refer people to it. I can still refer to it. And that's something I don't know in the history of, like, you see a lot of sort of B2B books or even sales marketing books that don't have the legs. Like what, Ogilvy on advertising? It's like the one with the biggest legs or something. I mean, like, it's really hard. It's like I was, if you go through Amazon, you try to find stuff that was written 15 years ago, it's kind of, it's not around anymore. And this had real legs. And so Kevin was the author of this book. He has a firm he works with, category design advisors, and spends a lot of his time writing books, including fiction books. Am I allowed to say?
you are?
All right.
And working with folks on this idea of category design, which was for Matt and I. We brought Kevin and his team in to Scale Venture Partners, where I work. And it was just amazing experience, even for us, the folks that sponsored it. And so today I'm just really excited to have Kevin Maney on here today and to talk about category design and wherever the conversation takes us. And so, Kevin, thanks so much for coming on the transaction. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, very, very cool. It's great. Glad to be here.
All right. So, Kevin, let's get into business. And then, as you can see, we get distracted on a variety of other topics. But
That's
uh,
that's more fun. But go ahead.
I know it is more fun. So, the way we like to start the show is the way we will start with you, which is, what is something that today's B2B market thinks that they are doing correctly, or is a truism, or is a way of doing things where actually they're wrong? And there's a different point of view that they should be taking on. Um, what what would that be, and what should they do about it? I'm gonna throw it to you, and then let's see where we go from there.
Yeah, Craig. Well, the big one to me is if you go on 90%, maybe 95% of tech company websites, what you will first see is a lot about here's what our product does. And that
Yep.
is absolutely ass backwards because what I want to know is why does it matter that you exist,
Yeah.
and what problem are you going to solve for me? And if you're first foot forward is here's what my product does, you're leaving it to me to try to figure out like, well, why does this matter to me, or what's this going to do for me? And what we often work with companies is how can we turn that around and hit people over the head first with um, what the problem is you're going to solve for me. Why does
Yeah.
it matter that you exist in the world? Because maybe there's like 100 other people that do this. What's special about you? And now, okay, now I'm interested enough for you to tell me the details about your product. And I think that is one of the most common mistakes that I see across the tech world.
I'm going to say something. And I'll have both of you guys react to that. So one is, well, first let me get into see what your opinion on this, Kevin. This kind of always been a problem in tech, or because you used to have to try to figure out what people did when you were writing
Always,
about.
always.
Okay,
Yeah.
but it does seem like, and here's where I'll get your guys' reaction. It does seem like now, okay, where I'll just set the scenario here. The world of tech there's a lot of tech, right? Today, as Esteban said on our show, 4 guys in an apartment in Brooklyn with an idea can go create $1 million SaaS company.
Yep.
In weeks. So you've got
That's
all
ambitious.
our venture. Yeah. Well, come on. If I can't be hyperbolic, how can I set an apocalyptic scenario without some hyperbole?
Yeah.
But we've got all the venture money. We have, by the way, AI is just bringing folks to the table, right? We've got all the incumbents, and we've got a lot of information out there outside of the vendors, right? And then we've got anybody can create a SaaS company. So you've got a lot of different sort of pieces of the world that is really hard to figure out who's who, what's what. And then if I took it down a second layer, is so you compete with the whole world of someone could buy something on the technology side. Then even in your category, which we'll have to talk about in a second, you've got your direct competitors and sort of that second layer. So if you took sales tech and you're in sales engagement, you have them, but then you have everything in sales tech. Then you have everything inside. So the world, it's very hard for the buyer to figure out who's who, what's what. So with that scenario, though, what Kevin just described, which has been a problem for a long time, is today even more. It is the imperative is heightened to a like 5-alarm fire. That what Kevin just described is absolutely what you have to be doing today in order to differentiate from a very crowded world. Okay, go react.
Me or Matt?
Well, Matt was saying yeah, but
I mean, I agree with you. It's really challenging, especially when you see companies that are sort of huddled in either the same category or sort of tangentially they're in the same category and they appeal to the same buyer, but maybe they grow up, at the same time and they're sort of like loose partners with one another. One thing is that you see pretty frequently, and you could say like maybe early sales tech where it was like, could you truly differentiate between Zoom Info, SalesLoft, and Outreach? And those, one's a data company and the other two are workflow businesses. You couldn't, because it was all about, hey, we're going to help you grow your pipeline through better prospecting. It's like, okay, but you guys don't do the same thing at all, and I shouldn't really think of Zoom Info and SalesLoft as competitors, but the messaging was so similar, even though one was a data company and one was a workflow company. So I think this has always been a problem. It's usually a problem when you see companies that are clustered around a single buyer who came up at a similar time, because design sensibility of website, messaging sensibility tend to operate almost like the way fashion goes in and out, right? Like, we're going to use active voice, we're going to use passive voice, we're going to use these design cues, we're going to build a website in dark mode, we're going to show curl commands, or we're going to have people. So like the way that people show their product, message their product often, operates in fads. And so as a result, it's very, very confusing for the buyer. I'm personally very curious to hear how Kevin thinks about getting around this. I think because everybody's intention is, hey, I want to create a website that's really clear. I want to create a website where, my buyer can come and understand the value of the product that we sell. But I also think about differentiating it by explaining how it's different. And so there's this tightrope that you walk along as a marketer, where you're thinking, well, I've got to explain what we do and people need to understand why this is so cool, but I also need to explain why we exist and why they should care. How do you think about sort of navigating those two competing priorities?
Yeah, and as you were hitting on, it's not certainly not just about the website. It's about every message you put out into the world, right?
Yeah.
But this is why, like the scenario Craig was describing too, um, that why it's become so essential to be able to describe to the person you're addressing the unique problem that you solve that nobody else solves. Because if you can tell me, so I'm a VP of sales, and as you pointed out, Matt, there's like 6 zillion companies coming at me with I got
Yeah.
this tech or this tech or whatever. But if you can convince me that all of those other things are not solving this one problem that I've got, in fact, sometimes all those other things are creating a problem
Sure.
that I don't even quite realize until you explain it to me why they're creating this new problem that is just like sitting there waiting to be solved. But if you can convince me that I have a problem, nothing else is solving it, and damn, if you're right, like if I could fix that, I never thought I could, but if I could fix that, like I'm interested. That's where you have them so that you can then tell them, here's what my product does. But if the buyers understand that first, they're just going to lump you in, as you said, Matt, with like all these other ones and say, I don't know, I got to sort this out. What's this one going to do for me? Do I have to put 4 things together to solve this
Yeah.
problem? Whatever.
Yeah.
So that, as we often tell companies, so we work with, or just companies we speak to or whatever, is that you really have to think of everything you do from the outside in. Is first look out at the buyers in the market and understand what the unique problem is to be solved, why nobody else is solving it, why the others are even making the problem worse perhaps, and find a way to describe that so that you've got the hook in my mouth first before you go and try to reel me into the boat.
So that makes sense. It's if you like when you go in and work with folks to sort of, so it sounds like I know we sort of gravitated to the website. That was a good reminder that we're talking about the overall. I mean, this is a company wide point
Yeah.
of view.
Right.
Yeah.
We know that, Kevin. Don't worry. But we just sort of Matt was pivoting off me where I got us into a really tactical place. But
Which, by the way, Craig, you say company wide and messaging, whatever. I mean, it's even things like job descriptions. Like if you as a company want to lure the right talent that's really going to understand what you're trying to do and why you matter in the world, this same kind of language should be in the job description you put out. Every kind of message, every way you talk to the world should be that way. But anyway, sorry to interrupt.
no, that's perfect. Yeah, I mean that's what I'm trying to think about here. Is so like, um, if I'm gonna go in and exactly, so one thing that I've learned from Kevin and Mike Damphouse, who he works with, is like this starts at the CEO level, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then and we so you're taught you're working with a CEO, or a CEO needs to do this for themselves. Are they so we first sort of figure out what's changed in the landscape. I'm just going for this and seeing what you say.
Mm-hmm.
What gaps have been created or problems have been created from these landscape changes, and then how do we solve it? That's the thing I've learned from you, and I've taken and stolen and done everything. But is that so? Let's just take that methodology. That's where we start. Is that fair, or is there other elements that we need to think about? Or like, if I did one thing, would that be sort of one of the game changers that would at least lead us in the right direction to start thinking about how we build our company in the right way? Or how
Yeah.
should I think about it?
Yeah, we found that's a really powerful first layer tool. We actually present it as an equation, which we present as context plus missing plus innovation equals a new category. So, and you just described it just using different words, but context is how the landscape has changed, what technologies are out there, what new technologies are arising, like generative AI that can maybe make a possible to solve a problem in a brand new way. Um, what's going on in the world, COVID, pandemic, completely changed the nature of supply chains or where we work. All these things might be part of the context around the audience you're trying to address. And you need to understand that first, because if you understand and really understand what that context is and how it's changing, and by the way, the greater the context changes, the more opportunities there are for new products and services to go into that, because it's creating new problems or new ways to solve old problems. So if you really understand that context around your target buyer, target audience, that really helps you see the next piece of that equation, which is what's missing. What's the new problem to be solved, or the problem that everything is creating, or the problem that the new context of technology allows you to solve in a completely different and better way than ever existed before. So if you can understand that context and use that understanding to see what is truly missing, so you're not like a me too and not going in and offering like, well, we could do this 10% better than somebody else. That's boring. Um, and and if you understand those two things, then the next logical step is, what's the innovation we can create to solve this missing in this new context? And if you see all of those things, basically now you've seen a new market category that doesn't exist yet and is waiting there for you to create. And that's a great thinking tool that we found works really well. And every company should put that up on a whiteboard and try to have that discussion.
Yeah, see, I led you down that path because then you said category. So we're going to go into category. But what I've always loved about that formula is because I'm too afraid to propose a category, Kevin, as you can imagine, because it's so hard. That's why you do what you do. But that exercise is so powerful. So that's I sort of I didn't mean to lead you there, but that's where I just love that as like housekeeping is a terrible word because it's really strategic, but as an exercise that everyone should do. Okay, so you said category, so let's make sure we set the table. Like, what is a category, and what is category design? And then let's dive into that.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Well, Gartner analyst or you guys, whatever, I'm sure, think of a category as, it's a market category that sits out there somewhere. And I think of it a little differently. I think of a category as a space in people's heads. That's really what it is, right? And if that space in people's heads, in people's minds, maybe is a better word, if people's minds doesn't exist, then there's your message, your product, whatever, doesn't really have any place to go. And so what we talk about is that you need to create that space in people's minds in order to have a place for your message and your product to go. I'll give you to walk through a quick example. Is electric cars. So if any of us were going to sit down with our families 15 years ago and have a conversation about what kind of car to buy, we would all be talking about gas-powered cars. An electric car would probably never enter the conversation because the space in our heads that said electric car is an option just didn't exist. So now you fast forward, Tesla basically pried that space open in our minds and said in our minds what an electric car should be like. And it's got the fancy panels and software driven and all the stuff that that a Tesla is. So it created not only a space in our minds, but an expectation of what this thing should be like. And because Tesla opened that space and set those expectations, it actually created a category that others can move into. So now Ford, GM, Volkswagen, whatever, they can build electric cars, and now the audience is going to know what you're talking about. Interestingly, Ford, GM, and whatever, and everybody else, if they're going to build an electric car, now they better build it to the expectation that Tesla set, which is an interesting little dynamic, because if you're the company that can do that, it puts you in a real power position for a long time, because you're setting the rules for what this industry is going to be like. And so if you think of it that way, then your job, if you are creating a unique product that doesn't exist yet, and you're brand new innovation that people aren't aware of, your first job actually is to go and open that space in people's minds. Because then if you can do that, then there's a way to accept what you're going to talk about that the world needs. And that's the way I think about a category.
I like it.
It's so good.
So,
it's such a great example too, because it's one that everybody
it's,
can understand. It's so good.
I know. I was like, yeah. Every time I talk to, I get it. I get it.
And
So,
now,
but yeah, go ahead.
yeah, and now the next step of that is, if you're a CEO of a company, how can you exploit that? I mean, that should be the next thing you ask, right? Is how can I be the one that not only opens that space in people's minds, but sets those expectations and sets the rules? Because if I do that, I'm in a power position. There's another interesting example of that is, if you go back to Uber's first presentation, which is available online, you can go see the presentation they made to investors.
We'll put it in the show notes. Sorry, I just got the chance to
And,
say show notes. Go ahead.
and in that presentation, they showed that app with the little map on it with the cars going around and you see all the cars, right? Whatever. Now, if you think about it, if you were setting up a company to do like a ride sharing app or whatever, before Uber ever existed, you could have done it 100 different ways. It didn't have to be the way that Uber did it, right?
Yeah.
But Uber did it that way, and then blew up in the public's minds. And so Uber was able to set that expectation of what ride sharing or on-demand transportation is going to look like and how it's going to look and feel on the app. And if you go to anywhere in the world, and you go to Singapore or you go to India or whatever, there's different companies that exist that do the same kind of thing that Uber does, but all their damn apps look exactly like Uber's. They all have some feature that looks basically like that, whole operates that way. That's an example of a company that went and set the rules and set that expectation so powerfully that everybody else in the world is going to do that, has to follow that expectation. Which, for again, always puts Uber in this power position because basically we're the rule setters now, and if we want to change the rules, everybody else better change the rules too.
Yeah, that again, another perfect example. The thing I'm thinking about is the map thing. Do I even look at that anymore? Oh yeah, I do. I want to know if the driver's close.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or where
yeah.
you're supposed to be standing when they arrive.
Yeah, that I'm bad at.
Yeah,
I've
me
had
too.
these dudes have to call me all the time and figure that out.
Yeah, me too.
Um,
I was in Denver last 2 weeks ago, and it was like I came down from the building, and it was like, no, you got to be in this. You got to be 3 blocks over here. I was like, what the hell?
So as you think about, I have a bunch of questions here, but I think maybe I'd start here because I work with a lot of founders, as you know, startups, and uh, what's the trigger to should you be thinking about? I guess you should be thinking about this when you found a company, right? Or is there another way to be thinking about when, or is the most important thing to define sort of that matrix we talked about before on context and when should I do this and start to position myself for a new category?
The transaction is presented by Ringmaster, the go-to branded podcast team. When Craig and I were thinking of starting this podcast, we had all the ideas in the world. But all the ideas in the world won't get you a great podcast. That's where Ringmaster comes in. They handle the creative, book guests, and do all the production for the podcast so we can focus on what we do best, talk to one another and our amazing guests. To discover how your company can leverage B2B podcasts to deliver outsized ROI, visit ringmaster.com today.
Well, I would. I mean, first of all, I would think you'd want to be thinking about this from day one or before day. I mean, this would be a way if you were sitting there and trying to, create your company from scratch. I would want to tell you to go through this exercise and help you
Yeah.
see what you should be doing from the day one. Um, but it also becomes something that is worth it's worth doing anytime. We've run into a number of companies that were maybe 3 to 5 years old, for instance, and they were founded to do something, and they did it pretty well. And now we're looking at it and go, well, we've done this thing, and we know there's more that we could, where some places we could take this, but there's like 5 different opinions of what that could be, and we're having a hard time getting our hands around it. That can be a great time to do it. We've also worked with companies that are 30 years old and getting a little tired in what they've been doing, and understand that fundamentally they have like all this great technology and um, a good reputation, but they just don't know where to go next to refresh themselves and what they do. That could be a great, so I think this is valuable at any point in a company's lifespan. And it's probably valuable to do over and over and over again, to go through this
Yeah.
exercise, constantly be relooking at this because again, going back to what we just talked about, that context is always changing.
Yeah, yeah. Because I think
And
if you use that same rubric to think about what is the context, what does that
Rubric.
change, what gaps have this established, you need to be revisiting that pretty frequently, at the very least on an annualized basis, to say, okay, are these things that we believed when we started this company or when we created this category still true? And if they're not, what's changed? And is
yep,
that a new place for us to either expand or create a new category? Or can we utilize what we have today to exploit that new gap?
yep, yeah. We had one company we worked with that their whole business was based um, on serving um, companies, employees in an office,
Yeah,
basically, right?
sure.
So this was a few years before the pandemic. The pandemic hits, completely changes the dynamic of who's going to be in an office, what an office even is, and what a corporate culture even is, because you're not physically in the same spaces. So that massive change in context um, forced them, and we helped them do it, to sit down again, 5 years after the first one, and say, this is an enormous change in context. It's going to have a huge impact on your business, but is there new opportunities that this creates, or new way to present what you do, or whatever? And so, yes, just doing it on a regular schedule is one thing, but also recognizing that there are moments in time that the context around your particular customer or audience is changing dramatically, and that's a great time to do it.
Yeah, Matt, I do think about, Matt's a startup CMO, and so like
Thanks for the
in the
pigeonhole.
game, no,
Does that mean he did his first startup when he was 7? Is that
amongst amongst the many things that Matt is really good at, it is a unique ability to CMO early stage.
Yeah.
It is.
It's a
And
skill set, right? Like, and there's a skill set for, I'm going to take a company public, or I'm going to,
yeah,
take it from $1 billion to $2 billion.
totally.
Yeah.
But it does seem like your world, the context is changing every 3 months.
It's very frequent. It's very
Yeah,
frequent. Yeah.
yeah.
Uh,
So you take Kevin's thing. It's like right now with tech. I mean, like there's certain situations where you got to monitor the context on a semi-regular basis, right?
yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's, for us, we work with some great partners who are, real innovators in the space, who, kind of drive a lot of the changes that happen. And so, for our business, we have to stay in touch with the Snowflakes and the Databricks and the Amazons of the world, as they're thinking about things differently. So how do we get ahead of that? And we prepare our product for the things that they're going to change. Yeah, because in this world and in many worlds, if you don't know that the context is going to change before it actually changes, you can be pretty far behind.
Yeah. So Kevin, and then the one question I used to get, in my new world now I rarely get, but if there's an existing, so like, if there's an existing category, I'll just use one, guys, that like, I'm not saying there's disruptors here, but just CRM.
Yep.
And you're a newish company, or you have a newish idea that would disrupt that category. What do you do there? Do you create a new one, or do you redefine it, or like, I guess it depends, but like, give us some situations you've seen there, and how you'd recommend attacking that, or
Yeah, and
what
maybe the
gives you
CRM category is challenging. So if you want to use a different
yeah.
example, that's
Yeah,
fine.
sorry. Thanks, Matt. Yeah.
Yeah.
That
Well, see,
I believe it or not, I agree with Matt, even though I'm the one who said it. All right, go ahead. Yeah.
No, CRM actually isn't a bad category to talk about. But let me talk about it generally, and then we could
Yeah.
come back to CRM. Um, so there are two different situations. If again you want to put something, what did you call your notes? Your that you want to leave on the side here. I got one for you. Is so a book called the Evolution of New Markets, which is by an economist named Paul Grosky, Geroski. Um,
Show
and
notes.
and yeah, show notes. There you go. And by the way, I mean I would recommend this to every entrepreneur, venture capitalist. It's a really interesting insight into how market categories evolve over time. And of course, so he's an economist. He used a lot of data to understand categories and create, kind of a pattern of what happens.
Right.
And of course, it's a general pattern, and there's going to be deviations depending on what's going on. But just generally speaking, this explains a lot. So I'm going to try to explain this without being able to do a whiteboardy thing. Um, there are two trajectories that happen in a category. So on day one, um, somebody invents something. We'll say that creates a new market category, that something that didn't exist before. And um, and if that thing is something that the world really needs, that it really should exist in the world, others are going to quickly recognize that. And very soon there's going to be a bunch of competitors in this sort of hockey sticky thing that's going to happen. A bunch of competitors are going to dive in, probably all using some different version of the design. They might all look and feel differently, but you're going to see this rise in number of competitors. In fact, by the way, if you start a company and that doesn't happen, it probably means you started something that doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Because if it mattered, others would want to be in there too.
Right.
And so you see this line go up, and a bunch of competitors all come in. Um, and and there's this point in time that Gorosky identified, and he calls it the moment the dominant design gets chosen. And that's the moment when, because the world really doesn't like a whole lot of choices about things that are all like different, and who knows which one's going to still be around in 2 years. And if I learn this one and it doesn't work really well, I got to learn a completely different design. The market wants a dominant design.
Right.
And so after a number of years of all these competitors beating each other up, a dominant design is going to get chosen. When that gets chosen, all those other designs mostly fall away, and the number of companies in the space falls away until you've got only a handful of companies, usually clustered around the dominant design, still in existence. At the same time as that's happening, there's another graph line that he adds to it, which is the total value of that category. So as that, before the dominant design, as all these companies are piling in, the value of that category stays pretty flat. That's the era of the early adopters. That's all the people that are kind of kicking the tires and thinking this is a little bit interesting, but um, the broader market has not yet bought into this thing. And when the dominant design gets chosen, at the same time as all those other designs sort of fall away, that also is when the rest of the market goes, all right, this is safe, this works, this is not going to go away. And that's when you see the hockey stick go the other way of the value of the market go up. So they cross, right? Number of competitors goes down, the value of the market goes up, and you end up with a handful of companies capturing this great amount of value. So that's the Gorosky curve, he calls it.
Yeah. Got it.
Now, what does that tell us about your question? Um, so it tells us two things. One is that if you look at all of what's going on around, the context around the company you're starting, and you realize that there isn't a dominant design yet, and there's all these companies fighting it out, and maybe the category is already 5 years old,
Yeah.
but it's still chaotic, and you're coming in for the first time. You do have a chance to create the dominant design. You have to go barrel in there and blow everybody else's minds away, but you have a chance to create the dominant design. By the way, a great way to see this is what happened with smartphones, because for years and years there were all 5-6 different operating systems, and all these form factors, and you have Blackberries with little chiclet keys and everything else. Apple comes in late and shows us the iPhone, and everybody goes, "Oh yeah, that's that's the dominant design. That's what we want these things to look at." Pretty quickly, everything else kind of falls away. So if you come in, you at that point in the early, but if you come into a space, if you're looking at a category, you come in and you go, you know what, the dominant design is chosen, it's done. Um, if you come in at that point, all you're ever going to be able to do is make an argument that ours is a little bit better and maybe we can scrape some market share away from these other guys. That's a classic like Me Too company. Usually not all that interesting.
Yep.
Um, so if you're looking at the context and you realize that you thought you were going to head into the space that where dominant design has been chosen and the game's kind of already over, that's when you really have to kind of say, well, I don't want to be in that category. I need to find something. Maybe it's a niche of that category or an adjacent category or something that seems new and maybe makes that category seem old, but you got to get yourself out of there. So with the CRM question, is long ago and far away, there was a company called Siebel that completely dominated that era of CRM. It was this on-premise software that created the dominant design and had won that category. And if somebody else would come into it, not really going to be effective. Salesforce comes along and basically says that's the whole no software thing that it came into the market with was its way to make the argument that other category, the Siebel one, that should now be put out to pasture because it's too hard to maintain, it's too hard to install, get people trained on, and if the updates are really a painful thing. Now we got this new thing called the cloud. We can operate a CRM system for you. You pay for it by subscription. You don't have to do all this installation stuff, blah, blah, blah. And so Salesforce came in and made an argument that we're not going into Siebel's category competing against them. We're creating something entirely different, a new category of cloud-based CRM or whatever you want to call it. So that would be the way to think about. That's a long answer to your question.
Yeah. You know who I was thinking about? So because you've got these categories that were created, and in many cases the premise software guys started it. Then we had a secondary disruption of said categories with SaaS, right?
Right.
And then in all likelihood we'll have a third with AI, no code and all of these things, right?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah, because you think about like ServiceNow disrupted Peregrine, right? There was others in the space, but just go with me on this.
Yes.
But Kevin, didn't they redefine ITSM? So the category was ITSM. It wasn't, and so, but what you said when you described CRM, you said cloud-based, right? But is that a redefinition of a category with a new design model, right? Predominant design model, or is that a new category? I know that's small. It's like a nuance, but like it does seem like they were able to, and I think it's better this way because what you said is right, which is the category creates a space in their mind. Mm-hmm. They know by looking at the category, I have this problem, and this is the type of thing you are on I forget what you guys are, the grocery store shelf. But now, so things have been around for 10, 15 years, but now a completely new design takes over. Mm-hmm. It's the same category but redefined. No?
Yeah, I would call it.
Over.
Yeah, we're probably all quibbling over semantics, but basically yes, what Salesforce had to, so do the Salesforce example still is when Salesforce came out, cloud computing was still a bit of an iffy prospect, right? Corporations didn't really want to put their stuff in the cloud at that point. And so Salesforce's job, and Benioff was great at this. I mean, it was the no software thing. It was just all their messaging, even some of the crazy stunts that they pulled to try to, the fake mock protest that they they organized in San Francisco with people marching down the street with no software signs, but all their
I
messaging
got
was was
I love
was
it.
around this idea of saying, um, that old way you did CRM, that's a there, we need to open up a new space in your minds that says there's this other space for doing this in the cloud in a completely different way. And even though it's still doing the same thing, it's doing it in a completely different way. It's solving the problem, not of not the it's not solving the CRM problem. It's actually solving the on-premise software problem,
Yeah.
which is why they were, that's well, the no software thing was all about defining the problem as having the CRM software on premise and having to maintain it,
Yeah.
rather than we're going to do something different with CRM.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. Makes total sense. I just like the thing is the conversation when I bring up Play Bigger and I talk to folks, there's these devotees who are like, well, I have to create a new category. They're not winning in the one that they're in. And they say, well, I got to create a new category. That's hard.
It is hard.
Yeah.
And, I mean, one of the things I would always say, look, I mean, every company can't create a new category. I mean, that's not going to be, that's not reality.
Right.
And there's thousands of billions, I don't know, God knows how many companies that exist in the world that are perfectly good investments and companies and spin off decent returns that are in somebody else's category and grab 10% of the market or
Right.
something like that. And there's no shame in that. But the outsized successes, the outlier successes, the things that that we all remember, and the companies that make people passionate and people want to be a part of, those are the companies that manage to create a category that really matters, and has an impact on the world. And so it's a matter of, if that's your goal, if you want to be one of those companies, which of course a lot of people start a company want to be one of those but it is hard. It's an uphill battle. You are trying to create a space in people's minds that doesn't exist. That's hard. And it takes years. There's few categories that get created overnight. I mean, it's something that you have to hammer at
Yeah.
for 6, 7, 10 years before it really takes hold.
Sorry. I love that. All right. I had to check my I don't know if you guys heard my little ding, but so what's another? So I just love these stories. I don't know about you, Matt. I mean,
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah.
I know, and you're just like, ah, man, little old me. We're talking about Uber and the iPhone and whatnot. But do you have any like stories where the category design was a double versus a quadruple grand slam, and like how did that come about, and what how did they get there, and what did that look like, just so I can have more realistic look, the tenets of the story are the most important thing, and I get it, and I love them, but like like something from a tech perspective that doesn't become the next Uber but was a winning strategy for them to do going through this process. Any thoughts on that? Like what that looks like, or is that a dumb question? Matt will tell me if it's a dumb question.
I don't think it's a dumb question, but I think it may be poorly worded.
But
Which is,
well,
not every company can create a category, but every company can benefit from the idea of category creation.
Yes.
And bringing that into the way that they message, and that can truly set them apart from maybe the other players that exist in that category. So, like, let's say you already exist in a category, one that maybe has lots and lots of players. Like, how do you start to incorporate that to either create a niche within that category that feels like, yeah, I still want to play in the CRM space, but I want to play over here, right? Like, an example of that might be Viva, who did that beautifully, right? Like, they built this incredible company that never really competed with Salesforce, is a CRM, and completely dominates the healthcare space.
Mm-hmm. Which, I mean, and again, there's like a lot of because we're talking about sort of intangible
Sure.
concepts, right? And so the semantics of that, maybe you could argue that they actually created their own niche category within
Yeah.
CRM, for healthcare, and now, I mean, that's that may be one way to think of it too. Um, but I absolutely agree with you, Matt, that every company, no matter what you're doing, can benefit from thinking this way, even if it's just about the way they message things to the world. Because
Mm-hmm.
if there are like 10 companies that you're competing with, and just to go way back to the beginning of this conversation, and they're all of them are their foot forward is like, let me tell you what our product does.
Right.
And you're the 10th competitor to come into that space, but you're smarter about the way you message it, and are saying, let me describe the problem that
Yeah.
you have, and then I'll tell you why we can fix it. That alone, that way of thinking alone would probably be beneficial to
Yeah.
any company in any space. Um, and Craig, to go back to one of your questions, and it sort of hits on the same thing that Matt's talking about, of just having this kind of thinking inside the organization. We did, I know this is a long time ago now, 8 years ago, 7 years ago. We did a project for a company that's been quite successful called Big Panda.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and at the time, um, it was just, it was very, very data centric, data center oriented. What we worked on them with, came up with, and uh, and they ran with a category that we created for maybe a year or so, something like that. And then if you look at their website or look at what they do, it's way beyond what we ever worked with them on. The messaging and whatever that we would have done with them is completely gone. But we do know that they've ingested that sort of way of thinking, and as they've developed over time, it has helped them to constantly create the new products and categories and messages and whatever that they've managed to do. And even though they're far away from the original work we did at this point, that it seems to have helped them be a tremendous success. And I do believe that that's just it's kind of like having a new muscle inside the corporation or inside the business.
Yeah. First of all, I just want to thank you for going back to my question. That's the kind of validation that I love to have, Kevin.
You're
And
welcome.
so, yeah, no problem.
Great question. Really well worded, Craig. Thank you.
Actually, Matt, it was. I got an example. I mean, give me some credit. You, and by the way, well, we can talk about your question later. It's very similar to the one in the front, but hey. So, but Kevin, this has been really helpful, and actually, I can pull this theme out on this way of thinking. One thing I wanted to sort of dig in on is, you guys do a narrative, right? As part of the process you go with people. I'm just wondering if we can talk about that for a minute. Do you want to sort of culminate all of your activities into a story? Is that kind of the idea of as you're thinking about category design, or just the healthy way of approaching running your company, as we've been talking about this whole hour? But I remember you guys read me a story. I won't say the company because I'm not allowed to. And I was with another analyst from Gartner, and they back we're not allowed to talk. We're not allowed to do it. We're just listening, and we were crying. I'm not kidding.
Tears.
It was so good. Yeah, it was this incredibly well worded. Obviously, Kevin did it. No offense, Mike. And but it had all the elements you're talking about. It was this brave new world, and leaving these gaps. And I was and it was our world because it was in sales. I mean, we were my God. He's what do you think? And we were quiet. We're just well, dude, that was amazing. Just tell me about that exercise and what that means, and what how that translated to a company that's just trying to think the way we're talking about today. And is it important, or is it something later stage, or I don't know? But it was just so amazing that I want to bring it up.
Well, thank you, Greg, first of all. But look, I mean, there are lots of ways to to communicate what you want to say. But it's just human nature. These stories are probably the most powerful way you can communicate something. And so that's why we focus on crafting a story that captures the category strategy. And the story there's a bit of a formula to it. I mean, it really is. The first part of the story is, let's talk about the problem and describe why you have it, and what what the pain is that you feel because of it, and why nothing else is solving it. And let's really make you feel that first. And then once we describe that, then we can say, and you're ready for us to say, but there's a new way to solve that. Here is this thing that we do, and then you can lay out more about, here's how it works, and if it works this way, here's what the world looks like when you solve that problem, and what your world looks like. And actually, we leave to the very end. All of that has no branding in it whatsoever. It's all just about something that should exist in the world, basically. This problem that does exist, and the solution that should exist, no matter who does it. And if that's all true, then we've described something that matters. And then that very last piece of the story is, and let us tell you why we're uniquely positioned to bring this to you. And that only needs to be a short bit that just says, here's who we are. Maybe a little, we've got a history of doing this, whatever. And then put a little branding spin at the end. I mean, that's the way we construct the story. Now, there may be other great ways to construct a story, but I think the larger point is that capturing a strategy in a story format is a great way to communicate it to the rest of the company, to the partners that you want to have, and ultimately to the market.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of The Transaction. Craig and I really appreciate the fact that you've listened all the way to the end. What are you actually doing here? For show notes and other episodes, please visit us at thetransactionpod.com. Like and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any other place you get your podcast from. The Transaction is sponsored and produced by Ringmaster, the go-to branded podcast team. To discover how your company can leverage B2B podcasts to deliver outsized ROI, visit ringmaster.com now. Either you have walked away from your podcast device, or this is playing somewhere in the background. Someone in your house would really like for you to shut this off now.